You think this hearing is just about money? I did too. Until I saw my sister's eyes. They were not grieving. They were closing a deal. She walked in like it was a red carpet while our parents sat behind her like a silent cheer squad. But I only said one sentence that silenced the room. Please wait for the last person. He was not a lawyer, but he held the key to destroying her world with a single line of text. My name is Eleanor Graham, and I sat alone on the wooden bench on the left side of the courtroom aisle. The air in Department 34 smelled of lemon pledge and old paper, a stale scent that seemed to trap the anxiety of every person who had ever sat here waiting to lose something. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My knuckles were white, but my face was still. I had practiced this stillness in the mirror for 3 nights. I knew exactly what was about to happen because I knew my family. They did not just plan events, they choreographed them. The court clerk read the case name from the docket sheet with a bored, monotone rhythm, as if ordering a sandwich rather than dismantling a life. Estate of Arthur Brooks. Hearing on petition for immediate transfer of assets. The moment the last syllable left the clerk's mouth, my sister moved. Sloane Graham stood up. It was fluid, graceful, and entirely rehearsed. She did not just stand, she ascended. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that I knew cost more than $4,000. It was that specific shade of expensive beige that wealthy women wear to signal they are harmless, maternal, and virtuous. It was the color of innocence bought with a credit line. Her hair was pulled back in a low, loose bun that looked effortless, but had probably taken 45 minutes to style. She wore no visible logo, no flashy diamonds. This was quiet luxury. It was designed to make the judge look at her and see a grieving, responsible granddaughter who just wanted to take care of business. She projected competence and sorrow in equal measure. I watched her back. I watched the way her shoulders slumped just enough to suggest the weight of the world was resting on them. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Beside her, at the counsel table, stood Mitchell Dane. He was a lawyer who wore suits that were too shiny and colognes that lingered in rooms long after he left. He placed a stack of documents on the plaintiff's table. The stack was thin. That was the first sign of danger. A thick stack of paper usually meant bureaucratic clutter. A thin stack meant a weapon. It was a motion for summary judgment, or in this case, an ex parte petition to bypass the usual waiting periods. He slid it forward with the tip of his finger, a predator pushing a plate. "Good morning, Your Honor," Mitchell said. His voice was a rich baritone, the kind of voice that made lies sound like gospel. "Mitchell Dane, representing the petitioner, Sloane Graham. We are here on an expedited matter regarding the estate of the late Arthur Brooks." I shifted my gaze to the gallery behind them. My parents, Thomas and Marjorie Graham, sat directly behind Sloane. They were the perfect supporting cast. My father wore his Navy church suit, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. They nodded in synchronization as Mitchell spoke. It was a subtle movement, a gentle bobbing of heads that said, "We agree. We support this. We are the good people here." They looked like they were protecting the family legacy. But I knew the truth. They were not protecting anything. They were waiting to be fed. Their eyes were not wet with tears. They were bright with the anticipation of a wire transfer. They did not look at me, not once. I was the ghost in the room. I was the obstacle they had already mentally removed. "Your Honor," Mitchell continued, his voice dropping an octave to convey grave concern, "we are requesting an immediate order to transfer control of the decedent's liquid assets to Ms. Graham. We have reason to believe that the estate is vulnerable, given the mental state of the deceased in his final months and the lack of a clear alternative custodian. Time is of the essence. My client is the natural successor. She has managed the family affairs for years." It was a lie. Sloane had never managed anything in her life except her social calendar and her image. But the lie hung in the air, heavy and convincing. The judge, a man named Harrison who looked like he had been listening to family squabbles for 30 years and was tired of all of them, adjusted his glasses. He flipped through the thin file Mitchell had presented. "I see the petition," Judge Harrison said. "You are asking to bypass probate on the grounds of emergency preservation." "Yes, Your Honor," Mitchell said. "We have affidavits from Mr. and Mrs. Graham attesting to the urgency." Of course they did. My parents would sign an affidavit saying the sky was green if it meant getting access to the accounts before the end of the month. Judge Harrison looked up. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the gallery and landing on me. I was the only other person inside the bar, sitting at the respondent's table. Though I had no lawyer beside me, I was just a woman in a gray blazer that I had bought off the rack at a department store 2 years ago. I looked small compared to the wall of expensive wool and legal power on the other side. "Ms. Graham," the judge asked. He was looking at his file. Checking my name. "Eleanor Graham." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice did not shake. I was surprised by how steady it sounded in the large, echoing room. "You are the other potential heir listed in the initial filing," the judge said. "Do you have representation today?" "No, Your Honor. I am representing myself for this hearing." Mitchell Dane let out a short breath, a sound that was half sigh, half laugh. It was meant to be audible. It was meant to tell the judge. "Let's not waste time with the amateur." "Very well," Judge Harrison said. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You have heard the petition. Mr. Dane is asking for immediate letters of administration to be issued to your sister, Sloane Graham, granting her full control over the Arthur Brooks estate. Do you object, Ms. Graham?" The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone. I could feel the heat of my parents' stares on the back of my neck. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking I would fold. They were thinking I would cry. They were thinking that Eleanor, the quiet one, the one who took care of Grandpa while they were vacationing in Napa, would just lower her head and let the inevitable happen. They thought this was a formality. I stood up. I did not smooth my skirt. I did not touch my hair. I kept my hands at my sides. "Yes," I said. "I object." It was 2 words, but they hit the room like a physical blow. Sloane stiffened. Her perfect posture cracked for a fraction of a second. She turned her head slightly, just enough so I could see her profile. Her jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle feathering beneath her skin. This was not in the script. I was supposed to be the tragic, overwhelmed sister who stepped aside for the capable businesswoman. Mitchell Dane did not turn. He just smiled, a patronizing, oily expression that he directed solely at the judge. He stood up straighter, buttoning his suit jacket as if preparing to dismiss a child from the dinner table. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, his tone dripping with mock patience. "With all due respect to Ms. Eleanor Graham, an objection requires a legal basis. It requires standing and grounds. We have a petition supported by the majority of the family. We have evidence of the decedent's incapacity. Does the respondent have a counter-petition? Does she have a will? Does she have anything other than sibling rivalry?" He paused for effect. He was good. He was painting me as the jealous younger sister, the bitter one who wanted to spoil the winner's victory lap. "The estate is substantial," Mitchell continued, pressing his advantage. "It involves complex real estate holdings and investment portfolios. It requires professional management immediately. Leaving it in limbo because of an emotional objection would be negligent, unless Ms. Graham has a document that supersedes the laws of intestacy right now. This objection is frivolous." Judge Harrison looked at me. "He has a point. Ms. Graham, you cannot simply object because you dislike the outcome. Do you have documents to submit? Do you have a legal reason why your sister should not be appointed administrator?" I looked at Sloane. She was fully turned toward me now. Her eyes met mine. There was no sadness in them. There was no grief for the grandfather who had raised us. There was only cold, hard calculation. Her eyes were saying, "Don't be stupid. Eleanor, you can't win this. Take the settlement we offer later and sit down." I looked at my parents. My mother's handkerchief was gone. Her mouth was a thin, angry line. My father was glaring. his face reddening. They looked at me with the specific hatred reserved for family members who refuse to play their assigned roles. I looked back at the judge. I took a slow breath. I did not reach for a briefcase. I did not pull out a frantic stack of papers to counter Mitchell's thin blade. I had nothing on the table in front of me. "I do not have a petition, Your Honor," I said. Mitchell let out an audible scoff. Then, "Your Honor, I move to—" "But," I said, cutting him off. I did not raise my voice, but I pitched it to Carrie. "I am not the one who needs to file a petition." "Ms. Graham," the judge said, his voice sharpening with impatience, "we are on a tight schedule. If you have no documents, on what grounds are you delaying this ruling?" I stood there, feeling the silence stretch. I knew what was about to happen. I knew because I had sent the text message exactly 15 minutes ago. I knew that the traffic from the financial district took exactly 12 minutes. I knew that the security check downstairs took 3 minutes. I looked Mitchell Dane in the eye. For the first time, his smile faltered. He saw something in my face that he hadn't expected. He saw that I wasn't afraid. "I am waiting," I said clearly, "for the last person." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Someone in the back of the gallery giggled, a nervous, high-pitched sound. It sounded absurd. The last person who was I waiting for? A surprise witness, a long-lost relative. It sounded like a line from a bad television drama, and I could feel the derision rolling off Mitchell Dane in waves. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, shaking his head and chuckling. "This is a courtroom, not a theater. We are not waiting for a surprise guest. I ask that you rule on the petition." The judge opened his mouth to agree. He raised his gavel, ready to end the farce and grant Sloane everything she had ever wanted. My parents relaxed, sensing the victory was back on track. Sloane smoothed the front of her expensive coat, her confidence returning. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom clicked. The sound was sharp and distinct, cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. It wasn't the hesitant opening of a late tourist or a lost intern. It was the decisive, heavy sound of a door being opened by someone who had every right to be there. Every head in the room turned. Sloane turned. Mitchell turned. My parents turned. The light from the hallway spilled into the dim courtroom, silhouetting a figure standing in the threshold. He did not look like anyone my family knew. He did not look like a friend. He did not look like a family member. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew colder. The smug confidence that had surrounded Sloane and her lawyer seemed to evaporate, replaced by a sudden, instinctive wariness. I did not turn around. I didn't have to. I just watched my sister's face as the blood drained out of it, leaving her pale beneath her perfect makeup. I watched the realization hit her that the script she had memorized was useless against what was walking down the aisle. The waiting was over. The man who entered the room moved like a shadow detached from a wall. He was not wearing the kind of suit Mitchell Dane wore. Mitchell's suit was designed to be looked at. It shouted its price tag and the thread count of its Italian wool. The newcomer's suit was black, matte, and utterly forgettable. It fit him with the precision of military armor. He wore no tie clip. He wore no watch. He wore no wedding ring. There was absolutely nothing on him that caught the light, nothing that offered a clue to his personality or his tax bracket. He was a void in the center of the courtroom, a walking absence of detail. He held a single envelope in his left hand. It was thick, legal-sized, and sealed with red security tape that looked stark and violent against the white paper. He did not look at the gallery. He did not glance at my parents, who had twisted in their seats to stare at him with open mouths. He did not look at Sloane, who was still standing, her posture rigid, her beautiful face frozen in a look of mild offense. To him, they were furniture. They were obstacles to be navigated around. He walked down the center aisle with a rhythmic, measured cadence. Click, click, click. The sound of his heels on the linoleum floor was the only noise in the room. It was the sound of a clock ticking down. I watched him pass the bar. He did not stop at the plaintiff's table. He did not stop at the defense table. He walked straight to the court clerk's station, a small fortress of files and computer monitors beneath the judge's bench. He stopped. He placed the envelope on the clerk's high desk with a deliberate, gentle motion. Then he turned his head, for the first time. He looked at someone. He looked at me. "Eleanor Graham," he said. His voice was like his suit, flat, unemotional. It was not a greeting. It was a verification. He was confirming that the person he was there to protect was present. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply stated my name as a fact, then turned his attention to the judge. "Documents for the court," the man announced. "From the trustee, Judge Harrison, who had been on the verge of ruling against me." Paused. His gavel was still hovering a few inches above its block. He looked at the man, then at the envelope, then back at the man. In a probate court, unexpected deliveries are rare. Usually, everything is filed electronically, stamped, and processed weeks in advance. A physical delivery in the middle of a hearing was an anomaly. It suggested that the system had failed, or that someone had been working outside of it. "Identify yourself," Judge Harrison said. His voice was wary. "I am a courier for Marston Fiduciary Trust Services," the man said. He did not give his name. He did not need to. The name of the firm was the only identification that mattered. A ripple of unease went through the room. I saw Mitchell Dane's head snap up. Marston Fiduciary was not a local law firm. It was not a family practice. It was a corporate fortress. They handled wealth that did not shout. They handled wealth that disappeared into tax havens and locked vaults. They were the cleaners of the financial world. If Marston was involved, this was no longer a dispute about a grandfather's checking account. The clerk picked up the envelope and handed it up to the judge. Judge Harrison took it. He inspected the seal. He reached for a letter opener and slit the top of the envelope. The sound of paper tearing was sharp and loud, like a piece of fabric ripping. Sloane was still standing. She looked uncertain for the first time. She looked at Mitchell, silently demanding an explanation, but Mitchell was staring at the judge's hands. Judge Harrison pulled out a sheaf of documents. They were stapled in blue legal backing. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. The silence that followed was excruciating. It lasted for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I watched the judge's eyes move left to right, left to right. I saw his eyebrows knit together. I saw him flip a page, then another, with increasing speed. He was not just reading, he was realizing. His expression shifted from professional boredom to alert surprise, and then to a cold, hard seriousness. He looked like a man who had been told he was directing a school play, only to find out halfway through that the guns were real. He looked up. He did not look at me. He looked at Sloane. "Counsel," the judge said. His voice had lost its impatient edge. It was now dangerously quiet. "Are you aware of the contents of this filing?" Mitchell Dane stood up, buttoning his jacket again, trying to regain control of the room. "Your Honor, we have not been served with any documents. We have no knowledge of a third-party intervention. Whatever this is, it is likely an attempt to delay the inevitable administration of the estate." "The estate," Judge Harrison repeated. He looked down at the paper again. "Mr. Dane, there is no estate." The words hung in the air. My mother let out a small gasp. Sloane blinked, her mask of composure slipping. "I beg your pardon, Your Honor," Mitchell said, his smile faltering. "This document," the judge said, tapping the blue-backed file with his index finger, "is a certification of trust. It states that 48 hours prior to his death, Arthur Brooks transferred the title of all major assets, including the primary residence, the investment portfolios, and the rights to his intellectual property into the Arthur Brooks Revocable Living Trust." The judge looked directly at Mitchell. "You are petitioning for control of a probate estate that consists, as far as I can tell, of a checking account with less than $5,000 in it and a 2014 sedan. Everything else is gone. It is out of my jurisdiction. It is out of probate." Mitchell's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his tie. He gripped the edge of the table. "That is impossible. Mr. Brooks was incapacitated. He could not have executed a complex trust instrument. We contest the validity of this transfer. We assert that this falls under the purview of this court to adjudicate fraud. The probate court maintains jurisdiction over assets wrongfully removed from the estate." "Sit down. Mr. Dane," Judge Harrison said. "It wasn't a request. It was an order." "Your Honor, I must insist," Mitchell started. "I said sit down," the judge barked. The echo of his voice bounced off the high ceiling. Mitchell sat. He collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Judge Harrison turned a page. "The successor trustee is listed as Marston Fiduciary Trust Services. They have accepted the appointment. They are now the legal owners of the property. But that is not the only thing in here." The judge looked at Sloane. "Ms. Graham, please remain standing." Sloane stood there. She looked smaller than she had 5 minutes ago. The quiet luxury coat suddenly looked like a costume. She was gripping her handbag so tightly that her knuckles were white. "This trust instrument," Judge Harrison said, reading from the page, "contains a specific provision, Clause 12, subsection B." He looked up at the ceiling for a moment, as if marveling at the brutality of what he was reading, then looked back at my sister. "It is a no-contest clause," the judge said, "also known as an in terrorem clause. Are you familiar with the term, Ms. Graham?" Sloane did not speak. She shook her head slightly. "It means," the judge continued, translating the legalese into plain, lethal English, "that any beneficiary who challenges the validity of this trust, or who attempts to assert a claim against the assets through probate court when those assets have been designated to the trust, shall be treated as if they had predeceased the grantor." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. "In layman's terms," the judge said, leaning forward, "it means if you fight this, you get nothing, zero. You are erased from the will." He paused to let that sink in. "The document was filed into the record the moment the trustee accepted the position," Judge Harrison said. "By filing this petition today, this petition where you claim the assets belong in probate and demand control, you may have just triggered that clause. You walked into this courtroom asking for everything. You might walk out having forfeited your entire inheritance." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Now, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Because the record is running. Did you know this trust existed? Did you know your grandfather had made these arrangements?" Sloane's face changed. The confident, grieving granddaughter vanished. The mask did not just crack. It shattered. Beneath it, I saw the panic of a woman who had spent money she did not have, banking on a check that was never going to clear. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at Mitchell, but Mitchell was staring at his table, refusing to make eye contact. He knew he had just walked his client into a minefield. My parents were frozen. My father's face was gray. My mother looked like she was having trouble breathing. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that they were not the authors of this story. They were characters in a chapter that Arthur Brooks had written before he died. I looked at the man in the black suit. He was standing by the wall now, his hands clasped behind his back. He was watching Sloane, too. His expression had not changed. He was not enjoying her panic. He was simply observing the execution of a protocol. Sloane stammered. Her voice was thin and reedy. "I thought Grandpa was sick. He didn't know what he was doing." "That is not what I asked," Judge Harrison said. "I asked if you knew." Sloane looked at me. Her eyes were wild. She was pleading with me, silently begging me to step in, to say something, to fix it like I always did. She wanted Eleanor the fixer. She wanted Eleanor the doormat, but Eleanor the doormat was gone. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I did not offer a lifeline. I just watched. "I need a recess," Mitchell Dane blurted out, standing up again. "Your Honor, we need a brief recess to consult with my client regarding this new evidence." Judge Harrison looked at the clock on the wall. This is not evidence, Mr. Dane. This is a governing instrument. But I am curious. The petition you filed claimed there were no other testamentary documents. That was a statement made under penalty of perjury. Mitchell pulled at his collar. We were unaware of the validity of any other documents. So you knew there were documents, the judge said. It wasn't a question. You just decided they didn't count. The judge closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot. I will not grant a recess, the judge said, but I will grant you a chance to explain why I shouldn't sanction you for filing a frivolous petition in bad faith. However, before we get to that, we have another issue. He tapped the document again. The trust outlines the assets clearly, the judge said, but the trustee has also included an addendum regarding the behavior of the beneficiaries prior to the death of the grantor. It seems Mr. Brooks was very specific about who was allowed to inherit what. He looked at Sloane with a mixture of pity and distaste. Ms. Graham, the judge said, according to this, you are not just at risk of losing your share because of this hearing. You are at risk because of what you did last week. Sloane's hands flew to her mouth. The blood drained from her face completely. The man in the black suit took one step forward. It was a subtle movement, but it drew everyone's eye. He nodded to the judge, a silent confirmation. We will proceed, Judge Harrison said, but let the record show that the nature of this case has changed. This is no longer an administrative hearing. This is now an adversarial proceeding regarding the validity of a trust contest. He looked at me. Ms. Eleanor Graham, you objected. You said you were waiting for the last person. Is this the person? Yes, Your Honor, I said. And do you join the trustee in asserting the validity of this document? I do. Then let's see what else your grandfather had to say, the judge said. And he turned the page to the next section of the trust. The air in the room was cold, but for the first time in months, I felt warm. I looked at the back of my sister's head and saw a loose strand of hair fall from her perfect bun. She was trembling. The quiet luxury was gone. All that was left was the loud, desperate reality of a woman who had just realized that the check was due, and she was the one who had to pay. The silence in the courtroom did not last. It shattered the moment Sloane realized that her grief performance was no longer currency. The judge had just threatened her with the one thing she feared more than death poverty. The no contest clause was a wall, and she had run straight into it at full speed. But Sloane Graham was not a person who accepted defeat. She was a person who renegotiated reality. She took a breath. It was a sharp, ugly sound, like a vacuum seal breaking. She straightened her back, shedding the slumped posture of the mourning granddaughter. When she spoke, her voice was no longer soft. It was brittle and high. He was influenced, Sloane said. He did not know what he was signing. It was the classic pivot. When the law is against you, attack the mind of the man who wrote the law. Judge Harrison looked down at her from the bench. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man who had heard this excuse 5,000 times before lunch. He tapped the thick file that the man in the black suit had placed on his desk. You are alleging lack of capacity, the judge asked. That is a serious claim, Ms. Graham. Do you have medical records to support it? Do you have a diagnosis from the time of the signing? I know my grandfather, Sloane insisted, her voice rising. He was 89 years old. He forgot names. He confused dates. He was vulnerable. If he signed that trust, it was because someone put a pen in his hand and told him it was a birthday card. She turned and pointed a manicured finger at me. It was a theatrical gesture, straight out of a bad movie, but the hatred behind it was real. She was living with him, Sloane said. She controlled who came in and who went out. She controlled the phone lines. Mitchell Dane, seeing an opening, jumped back into the fray. He smoothed his tie, trying to recover his professional footing. Your Honor, my client raises a valid point. The timing of this trust created just 48 hours before death is highly suspicious. It bears all the hallmarks of a deathbed conversion. We submit that Mr. Brooks was not of sound mind and was under duress. The judge did not look at me. He opened the file again. He flipped past the first page, past the trust certification, and stopped at a section near the back. He ran his finger down the page. "Mr. Dane," the judge said calmly, "are you aware of what a certificate of independent review is?" Mitchell stiffened. "I am, Your Honor." "Good," Judge Harrison said, "because there is one attached to this trust, and not just that, there is an affidavit of capacity signed by Dr. Aris Thorne, a board-certified neurologist. It is dated the morning the trust was executed." The judge looked up, his eyes hard behind his glasses. "The doctor's notes are quite detailed. He conducted a mini-mental state examination. Mr. Brooks scored 29 out of 30. The only thing he missed was the exact day of the week, which, frankly, I often miss myself. The doctor notes that Mr. Brooks was lucid, oriented, and specifically stated, I am quoting here, "I want to ensure my granddaughter Sloane cannot spend my money on her vanity projects." A few people in the gallery gasped. It was a rare moment of unvarnished truth in a room usually suffocated by politeness. Sloane flinched as if she had been slapped. Her face went from pale to a blotchy red. "That is a lie," she hissed. "He would never say that." "It is in the sworn affidavit," the judge said, "and the signing was witnessed by 2 disinterested parties and videotaped. The trustee has provided a thumb drive with the digital recording. Do you want me to play it for the court?" "Graham, do you want to watch your grandfather explain exactly why he cut you out of the decision-making process?" Mitchell Dane put a hand on Sloane's arm to silence her. He knew they were losing on capacity. The documentation was bulletproof. It was overkill. It was the work of a man who knew his family would come for his bones, and who had built a steel cage to protect them. But Mitchell was a lawyer who got paid by the hour, and he was not ready to give up. He shifted his weight, looking for a new angle. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, his voice taking on a darker, more serious tone. "Even if he had capacity, that does not rule out undue influence. Eleanor Graham was his primary caregiver. She was in a position of trust. If she used that position to poison his mind against his other relatives, to feed him false narratives, that is grounds to invalidate the instrument." He swept his hand toward me, painting me as the villain. "We demand the production of the full trust instrument and all communication logs between the decedent and the respondent for the last 6 months. We suspect isolation tactics." This was the moment. The moment they stopped arguing about paper and started arguing about character. Sloane looked at Mitchell, and I saw the gears turn in her head. She realized that undue influence was too soft. It was too vague. She needed something that would make the judge look at me with disgust. She needed a word that carried the weight of a crime. Sloane stepped forward, shaking off her lawyer's hand. She looked directly at the judge. "It is not just influence," she said. Her voice was steady now, cold and venomous. "It is financial exploitation." The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke. Financial exploitation, elder abuse. It was the nuclear option. It was an accusation that could destroy a reputation, end a career, and land someone in prison. "She didn't just talk to him," Sloane continued, gaining momentum. "She stole from him. She isolated him so she could drain his accounts before he died. That is why the probate estate is empty, Your Honor, not because of a trust. Because she spent it, and then—" My mother stood up. Marjorie Graham had been sitting quietly, dabbing her eyes, playing the role of the distraught daughter. But now, she saw her opening. She saw a chance to be the victim. "It is true," my mother said. Her voice wavered perfectly. "We tried to visit. We really did. Every Sunday we tried to call. But Eleanor, she always had an excuse. Dad is sleeping. Dad is sick. Dad doesn't want to see you." She changed the locks on the house 3 months ago. Who changes the locks on their own dying father unless they are hiding something? I sat there, frozen. I remembered why I had changed the locks. I had changed them because I came home one afternoon and found Sloane in the study, rifling through the desk drawers. looking for Grandpa's checkbook while he was napping upstairs. I remembered the look on her face when I caught her, not shame, but annoyance. I remembered Grandpa crying that night, asking me if he was safe in his own home. But I could not say that. Not now. Not without looking defensive. "She cut us off," my mother sobbed, leaning into my father's shoulder. "She stole our final moments with him just so she could take his money." The courtroom murmured. Sympathy is a fickle thing, and a crying mother is a powerful image. For a moment, the narrative shifted. I was no longer the quiet defendant. I was the predator. Judge Harrison watched the performance. He did not reach for a tissue. He did not offer condolences. He waited until my mother's sobs subsided into a strategic sniffle. "That is a very serious accusation. Mrs. Graham," the judge said. "It is the truth," my father said, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and booming, the voice he used to intimidate waiters and valet drivers. "We want an investigation. We want a forensic accounting of every dime she touched." The judge turned his gaze back to me. "Ms. Graham, did you restrict access to the decedent?" "I followed his instructions, Your Honor," I said quietly. "Convenient," Sloan scoffed. Judge Harrison raised a hand to silence her. He looked at Mitchell Dane. "Mr. Dane, you are alleging elder abuse and financial exploitation. These are criminal acts. If what you say is true, there must be a paper trail. Where is the report from Adult Protective Services?" Mitchell blinked. "We did not file one at the time. We were trying to handle it as a family matter." "Where is the police report?" the judge asked. "If she changed the locks illegally, surely you called the sheriff." "We didn't want to embarrass the family," Mitchell said. "Where is the medical report indicating signs of neglect?" The judge pressed. "Where is the statement from his other doctors?" "You claim she was draining accounts. Do you have a single bank statement showing irregular withdrawals prior to death?" "We are asking for discovery to find that evidence," Mitchell argued. "That is the point of the petition." "No," Judge Harrison said sharply. "You do not file a petition alleging a crime just to go fishing for evidence of a crime. You need a basis. You need probable cause. Right now, all I have is a trust that is properly executed, a capacity declaration from a neurologist, and a grieving family that seems very upset that the bank accounts are empty." The judge leaned forward. "Do you have any witness today, anyone outside of the immediate beneficiaries who can attest to this alleged isolation?" Mitchell turned to the back of the room. He gestured to a man standing near the door. It was Cousin Greg. Greg was a second cousin on my father's side, a man who had borrowed money from everyone in the family and never paid it back. He looked uncomfortable in a suit that was too large for him. "We have Mr. Gregory Evans," Mitchell said. "He can testify that he was turned away at the door." Judge Harrison looked at Cousin Greg. Greg looked at his shoes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked anywhere but at me. "Mr. Evans," the judge called out, "did you visit the home on the date in question?" I went by," Greg stammered. "But the lights were off." "Did you knock?" the judge asked. "I rang the bell," Greg said. "And who answered?" "Nobody," Greg said. "So nobody answered the door," the judge summarized. "And your conclusion from this is that Eleanor Graham was inside, holding her grandfather hostage and forcing him to sign checks. Is that your testimony?" "I just know what Sloan told me," Greg muttered. "Hearsay," the judge said. "Sit down." The air went out of Mitchell's balloon. The witness was a disaster. The accusations were evaporating. Sloan looked furious. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You brainwashed him. You are a manipulator. Eleanor, you always have been. You think you are so smart with your silence, but we know what you did." The judge was about to speak, about to perhaps throw the whole petition out, when the man in the black suit moved. He had been standing so still that I had almost forgotten he was there. He took a step toward the bench. The movement was small, but it commanded attention. "Your Honor," the man said. His voice was calm, cutting through the emotional, chaotic noise my family was making. "Mr. the judge asked. realizing he still didn't have a name for the courier. "Representative for the trustee," the man said. "Regarding the allegations of isolation and undue influence, do you have a response?" the judge asked. "I have a document," the man said. Mitchell threw his hands up. "Another secret document. This is trial by ambush. We object to any further surprise evidence." "It is not evidence created by the trustee," the man said smoothly. "It is a document provided by the decedent, Mr. Brooks anticipated that his family would accuse his granddaughter of these specific acts. He anticipated the accusation of isolation. He anticipated the accusation of financial coercion. He provided the trustee with a supporting document to be released only in the event that these specific allegations were made in open court." My heart hammered in my chest. Grandpa had known. He had sat in his chair, looking out the window, and he had played this scenario out in his head. He knew his daughter. He knew his son. He knew his granddaughter. "Hand it up," Judge Harrison said. The man in black opened his leather portfolio. He did not pull out a thick legal file this time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not on legal bond. It was on personal stationery. The paper was slightly yellowed, the kind Grandpa used for his thank you notes. The man walked to the clerk and handed it over. The clerk passed it to the judge. The room was dead silent. My mother had stopped sniffing. Sloane was gripping the edge of the table so hard her fingernails were digging into the wood. Judge Harrison took the letter. He adjusted his glasses. He read it silently. As he read, his expression changed. The professional detachment vanished. A look of profound sadness crossed his face, followed by a flash of anger. He looked up from the paper and stared directly at my father. Then he looked at my mother. It was a look of judgment that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with humanity. He cleared his throat. "The document," the judge said, his voice quiet but resonating in the stillness, "is a handwritten letter from Arthur Brooks, dated 4 months ago." He looked at me. "Ms. Graham, you have not seen this." "No, Your Honor," I whispered. "It seems," the judge said, looking back at Sloane, "that your grandfather had a lot to say about why the locks were changed." He held the paper up. "Read it," Sloane challenged, though her voice was shaking. "Read it. I bet she dictated it to him." "I don't think so," the judge said. "The handwriting is quite distinctive, and the content well. The content is very specific." He lowered the paper and looked at the gallery. "He wrote this for today," the judge said. "He wrote this because he knew you would come here and blame the one person who actually cared for him." The judge paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on everyone's shoulders. "The letter is 1 page," the judge said, "and it begins with a sentence that I think we should all hear." He looked down at the paper and prepared to read. Judge Harrison held the single sheet of paper with a reverence that terrified me. The courtroom, usually a place of shuffling feet and coughing spectators, had fallen into a silence so profound that I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The judge read the letter to himself first. I watched his eyes track the lines, moving back and forth, his expression shifting from professional scrutiny to something softer, something almost apologetic. He looked up at me, and for the first time since the hearing began, I saw the barrier between judge and defendant dissolve. He was no longer looking at a potential con artist. He was looking at a granddaughter who had been telling the truth while standing alone against a firing squad. He cleared his throat, a sound that echoed like a gavel strike. "This letter," Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying to the back of the room, "is dated October 14th. That is 3 months prior to Mr. Brooks's passing. It is handwritten, it is signed, and it is notarized." He paused, letting the date sink in. October, the month my parents had claimed I was keeping them away, the month they claimed Grandpa was too far gone to know his own name. "I am going to read the opening paragraph into the record," the judge announced, "because it addresses the very heart of the petition before me." He lifted the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read, "If this letter is being read in a courtroom, it means that my son, Thomas, and his family have tried to steal my assets by blaming my granddaughter. Eleanor, it means they have done exactly what I feared they would do when I stopped answering their calls. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My father, Thomas Graham, went rigid in his seat. It was as if an invisible hand had reached out from the grave and slapped him across the face. His jaw locked, and the color drained from his skin, leaving him a pasty, sickly gray. Beside him, my mother made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. A strangled noise of someone who has suddenly realized the script has been ripped from her hands. She reached for her husband's arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket, but he did not move. He stared straight ahead at the judge, his eyes wide with shock. They had built their entire case on the idea that Arthur Brooks was a voiceless victim. They never imagined he had left a voice behind. Judge Harrison continued reading, his tone devoid of theatrics, which only made the words more devastating. I have met with my own counsel, the judge read. I have done this independently, without Eleanor present, because I need to protect her. I have established the Marston Trust not because I am confused, but because I am terrified. I am terrified of the pressure. I am terrified of the way my daughter-in-law looks at my house like she is already measuring it for curtains. I am terrified of the way my granddaughter Sloane asks about my bank accounts before she asks about my health. Sloane let out a sharp breath, her mouth opening to protest, but the judge raised a finger, cutting her off without looking up. I am creating this trust, the letter continued, to prevent what they tried to do last week. The judge stopped. He lowered the paper slightly and looked over the rim of his glasses at the plaintiff's table. Mitchell Dane was staring at the floor, his pen hovering uselessly over his legal pad. He knew, as every lawyer knows, that there is no defense against the clear, cogent voice of the deceased. The letter details a specific incident, Judge Harrison said, his voice tightening. Mr. Brooks writes that on the afternoon of October 7th, a mobile notary was brought to his home. He states that he did not request this notary. He states that he was napping when he was woken up by a man he did not know, standing in his bedroom with a clipboard, insisting that he needed to sign updated insurance forms immediately. I froze. I remembered that day. I had gone to the grocery store for 45 minutes. When I came back, Grandpa was trembling in his chair, clutching his chest, telling me a man had been there. I had thought he was having a nightmare. I had thought it was a hallucination caused by his medication. I had soothed him, made him tea, and told him no one was there. I felt a wave of nausea. It hadn't been a hallucination. Mr. Brooks writes, the judge continued, I refused to sign. I told the man to leave. When he refused and tried to put the pen in my hand, I pressed the emergency alert button around my neck. He ran out the back door before the security company called. I know who sent him. I saw my son's car parked down the street. The room erupted. That is a lie, my father shouted, jumping to his feet. His composure shattered completely. I was nowhere near there. He was hallucinating. He was seeing things. Sit down, Mr. Graham, the bailiff barked, stepping forward, his hand resting on his belt. He was paranoid. Sloane screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and frantic. Don't you see? This proves he was crazy. He thought people were breaking in to make him sign papers. It's classic dementia, paranoia. He was imagining conspiracies. Ms. Graham, silence, Judge Harrison roared. The authority in his voice was like a physical weight, crushing the hysteria rising from the gallery. He waited until my father sank back into his seat, breathing heavily, and until Sloane clamped her mouth shut, her chest heaving. Paranoia, Judge Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register, is a belief in things that are not real. However, Mr. Brooks did not just write about this incident. He included the incident report number from the security company. The judge held up a second, smaller piece of paper that had been clipped to the back of the letter. The trustee has provided the log from the alarm company, the judge said. October 7th, 2:14 in the afternoon. Panic button activated. Security called. Dispatch notes state, resident reports intruder attempting to force signature on documents. The intruder fled before police arrival. He looked at Sloane, his eyes cold. A man suffering from dementia does not hallucinate a mobile notary, refuse to sign, activate a panic alarm, and then write a coherent, legally sound letter to his trustee explaining exactly why he did it and who was responsible, the judge said. That is not madness. Ms. Graham, that is survival. Sloane shook her head, tears streaming down her face now, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. He was confused, she insisted. Though her voice lacked conviction, he didn't understand what he was doing. Confused people, Judge Harrison said, leaning forward. Do not create records this precise. Confused people do not hire Marston fiduciary. Confused people do not protect their granddaughters from predatory litigation 3 months in advance. Your grandfather was not confused. He was disappointed, and he was preparing for this exact moment. Mitchell Dane stood up. He looked pale, like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. He gathered his papers with trembling hands. Your Honor, Mitchell said, his voice weak. In light of this new information and the existence of the trust, we would like to move to withdraw our petition. We will handle this matter privately. It was the coward's way out. Withdraw the petition, pretend it never happened, and hope to avoid the fallout. Judge Harrison looked at Mitchell with a mixture of disbelief and disdain. Withdraw, the judge repeated. Mr. Dane, you cannot unring a bell. You came into my courtroom, under the penalty of perjury, and accused this woman, he gestured to me, of elder abuse and theft. You accused her of isolating a dying man. You tried to seize assets that did not belong to you, and now that the truth has come out, you want to simply say, never mind? We acted on the information we had. Mitchell stammered. You acted in bad faith, the judge corrected, and withdrawing the petition does not withdraw the consequences. The judge grabbed his gavel, but he didn't bang it. He held it like a weapon. I am denying your request to withdraw without prejudice, the judge ruled. The petition stands on the record, and because it stands, I am setting a hearing regarding the validity of the filing itself. He turned to the court clerk. Set a hearing for 30 days from today regarding sanctions against petitioner's counsel for filing a frivolous claim, and set a concurrent hearing to determine if the petitioner, Sloane Graham, has forfeited her standing as a beneficiary under the no contest clause of the Arthur Brooks Trust. Your Honor, please, Sloane cried out. I didn't know about the clause. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Judge Harrison said. And frankly, Ms. Graham, based on this letter, I don't believe you were ignorant. I believe you were gambling. The judge began to write on the docket sheet, the scratch of his pen loud in the silence. The energy in the room had shifted completely. My parents were no longer the aggrieved family. They were suspects. Sloane was no longer the heiress. She was a defendant, and I was just Eleanor. But for the first time in my life, that was enough. The bailiff, the officer who had shouted at my father earlier, walked up to the side of the judge's bench. He didn't look at the gallery. He leaned in and whispered something into the judge's ear. I watched Judge Harrison's face. He stopped writing. He listened intently, his eyebrows raising slightly. He nodded once, slowly. The bailiff stepped back and took a position near the gate that separated the audience from the legal area. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. It was a subtle move, a safety precaution, but I saw it. Judge Harrison looked up. He did not look at Sloane. He did not look at Mitchell. He looked past them, directly at my father. Mr. Graham, the judge said. My father looked up, startled. Yes. You are to remain seated, the judge ordered. Do not leave this courtroom. Excuse me, my father stammered. Am I being detained? This is a civil matter. It was a civil matter, the judge said. But the information the bailiff just gave me suggests that your involvement in the events of October 7th might be more than just a family dispute. My mother grabbed my father's arm, her face twisting in panic. Thomas, what is going on? I don't know, my father hissed. It's a mistake. The bailiff has been informed, Judge Harrison said, his voice level, that there is a sheriff's deputy in the hallway waiting to speak with you regarding an incident involving a mobile notary and a trespass complaint filed by the late Arthur Brooks. Apparently, the investigation was never closed. The color that had drained from my father's face did not return. He looked at the door, then back at the judge, realizing that the mobile notary story wasn't just a sad anecdote in a letter, it was a crime scene, and he had just been placed at the center of it. "Sit down, Mr. Graham," the judge repeated, "and stay quiet." I looked at the man in the black suit. He was still standing by the clerk's desk, impassive, silent. He hadn't said a word since handing over the letter. He didn't need to. He had brought the truth, wrapped in an envelope, and watched as it dismantled the lies my family had spent a lifetime building. He caught my eye, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a nod, not of friendship, but of acknowledgement. The job was done. The mechanism had been triggered, and now, the gears were grinding my sister and my father into dust. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom, which had already opened once to change the course of my life, swung open a second time. The sound was different this time. It was not the rhythmic, ominous click of the man in the black suit. It was a forceful, utilitarian shove. A uniformed officer from the sheriff's civil division stepped into the room. He was a large man, taking up space in the doorway with the casual authority of someone who delivers bad news for a living. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand, folded vertically as if to make it easier to slap into a palm. The air in the courtroom, already thin from tension, seemed to vanish entirely. My father, Thomas Graham, was still half standing, halfway between obeying the judge's order to sit and his own instinct to flee. He looked at the officer. The officer looked at the gallery. "Thomas Graham," the officer announced. His voice was not a question. It was a target acquisition. My father blinked. He looked like a deer caught in headlights that were moving at 80 miles an hour. "I am Thomas Graham." The officer walked down the center aisle. He did not look at the judge for permission. He had a job to do that superseded the civil proceedings of a probate hearing. He stopped directly in front of the low wooden railing that separated the spectators from the legal arena. He reached over the rail and extended the envelope toward my father. "You are served," the officer said. It is a phrase you hear in movies. In real life, it sounds clumsy and terrifying. My father's hand came up automatically, a reflex action. He took the envelope. It was heavy. I could see the weight of it in the way his wrist dipped slightly. He stared at the return address on the corner. I could not see the writing from where I sat, but I saw the reaction. The color did not just drain from his face, it plummeted. His skin turned a shade of gray that reminded me of wet newspaper. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been punched in the solar plexus. His arrogance, the thick armor of entitlement he had worn for 60 years, dissolved in a single second. He looked old. He looked terrified. "What is this, my mother?" Marjorie hissed, leaning over to snatch at the corner of the envelope. "Who sent this?" My father did not answer. He flipped the flap open with trembling fingers and pulled out the top sheet. His eyes scanned the header. His knees actually buckled, and he dropped heavily back onto the wooden bench. The sound of his body hitting the seat was audible in the silent room. Judge Harrison watched this unfold from the bench. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned. "Officer," the judge said calmly. "Thank you. You may step back." The officer nodded and turned on his heel, exiting the room as quickly as he had entered. My father looked up at the judge. His eyes were wide, pleading, as if the judge could somehow undo the piece of paper in his hands. "This," my father stammered, "this is a lawsuit from the security company and a criminal complaint citation." "That document is not within the jurisdiction of this probate hearing," Judge Harrison said, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "However, Mr. Graham, I feel compelled to remind you that you are currently under oath regarding your earlier statements about your whereabouts on October 7th. My father flinched. He looked down at the paper again. The date October 7th was likely printed there in bold ink, placing him at the scene of the crime he had just denied visiting. "This is harassment," my mother shrieked. She stood up, her face flushed with a blotchy, indignant red. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is doing this. Eleanor is doing this. She is weaponizing the legal system to humiliate her own parents." "Sit down, Mrs. Graham," the judge warned. "No," my mother cried. "I will not sit down. This is a setup. That man in the black suit, he brought this. This is an ambush." "Mrs. Graham," the judge said. His voice did not rise, but it hardened into something immovable. "This is not harassment. This is a consequence. This is what happens when people lie about events that have been recorded by third-party security services. Now, you will sit down, or I will have the bailiff remove you from this courtroom." My mother froze. She looked at the bailiff, who had taken a step forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. She looked at Sloane. She looked at Mitchell Dane. No one moved to help her. She slowly sank back into her seat, pulling her coat tight around her as if she were freezing. I looked at Sloane. My sister was not looking at our parents. She was not looking at the documents that were ruining our father's life. She was looking at me. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was not the look of a sister who had lost a legal battle. It was the look of a predator who had been out-hunted. Her eyes were narrow. Her jaw set so hard I could see the muscles twitching, the veneer of the grieving. Quiet luxury heiress was gone. In its place was something raw and ugly. She wasn't just angry about the money. She was furious that I, the quiet one, the invisible one, the one she had underestimated for 30 years, had dared to fight back. She mouthed 2 words to me across the room. I read her lips clearly. "You're dead." It wasn't a physical threat. It was a promise of social and emotional annihilation. But for the first time in my life, her anger did not make me small. It made me steady. "Your Honor," a flat voice said. The man in the black suit had stepped forward again. He was immune to the drama. He did not care about my father's gray face or my mother's hysterics. He had a checklist, and he was not finished. "Yes," Judge Harrison asked, turning his attention away from the gallery. "In light of the behavior exhibited in this courtroom," the man said, "and the active attempt to defraud the estate, which has now been entered into the record, the trustee requests an immediate protective order." Mitchell Dane's head snapped up. "Objection. That is excessive. My client has rights." "Your client," the judge interrupted, "has very few rights left in this room. Mr. Dane, continue." The man in black did not look at Mitchell. He spoke only to the judge. "We request a restraining order barring Sloane Graham, Thomas Graham, and Marjorie Graham from contacting any financial institution, custodian, or asset manager associated with the Arthur Brooks Trust. We request that they be barred from the property at 410 Maple Drive. We request that they be barred from accessing the digital portal for beneficiaries." "On what grounds?" Mitchell argued weakly. "On the grounds of preservation of assets," the man said. "We have reason to believe that once they leave this room, they will attempt to liquidate or interfere with assets that they believe they still have a claim to. In an effort to create confusion or leverage," the judge nodded. He didn't even hesitate. "Granted," Judge Harrison said. He signed the order on his bench, the pen scratching loudly. "The order is effective immediately. Mr. Dane, if your client sends so much as an email to the bank, I will hold her in contempt of court." He looked at Sloane. "Do you understand me? Ms. Graham, you are done. You came here with accusations that had no proof. You wasted the court's time. You attempted to defraud a trust. Do not make it worse by trying to act behind my back. The acting is over." Sloane stared at him, her chest heaving. She didn't answer. "I said, do you understand?" the judge barked. "Yes," Sloane whispered. It was a small, hateful sound. "This hearing is adjourned," Judge Harrison said. He slammed the gavel down. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The room dissolved into movement. Mitchell Dane began shoving papers into his briefcase, refusing to look at his client. My parents were huddled together, staring at the lawsuit in my father's hands as if it were a bomb. Sloane stood up, smoothed her coat, and turned to walk out without waiting for anyone. I stood up. My legs felt strange, light and trembling, as if I had just stepped off a roller coaster. I gathered my purse. I did not look at my family. I turned toward the side exit, the door reserved for court staff and lawyers, which the bailiff held open for me. I walked out of the courtroom and into the cool, quiet hallway. A woman was waiting for me there. Avery Holt was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed. She was wearing a sharp navy suit and holding a tablet. She had been my secret weapon, the advisor who had told me to go in alone, to look vulnerable, to let them dig their own graves before we dropped the hammer. She had been sitting in the back row, hidden behind a pillar, watching everything. She pushed off the wall and smiled. It was a grim, satisfied smile. "You did good, Eleanor," Avery said. "You held the line." "Is it over?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Did we win?" Avery fell into step beside me as we walked down the corridor, away from the main exit where my family would be facing the humiliation of a public exit. "We won the battle," Avery said. "The judge granted the sanctions. The no contest clause is triggered. Technically, Sloane is out. She lost the money. The house is safe." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 months. "Thank God." "But," Avery said, her tone cautious. "You saw her face. Sloane doesn't know how to stop. She thinks rules are for other people." "She can't do anything," I said. "The judge just signed the order. If she touches the accounts, she goes to jail." "That assumes she cares about jail more than she cares about winning," Avery said. "People like Sloane, when they lose control, they don't retreat, they escalate." We reached the elevator. I pressed the button. I felt a sense of finality. The man in the black suit had delivered the death blow. The judge had sealed it. My father was facing charges. My mother was neutralized. Then, Avery's phone buzzed. It wasn't a text message vibration. It was a long, insistent haptic pulse, a priority alert. Avery frowned. She lifted the phone and tapped the screen. Her eyes scanned the notification, and her walking pace slowed to a halt. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Avery looked at me. The satisfaction was gone from her face, replaced by a sharp, professional alarm. "It's the trust security system," Avery said. "We set up that monitoring protocol yesterday, just in case." "In case of what?" I asked. "In case of this," Avery said. She turned the screen toward me so I could see the red banner flashing across the top. "Security alert. Unusual activity detected. Attempted access blocked. Source mobile device. Location 300 feet from current position." "Someone just tried to log into the beneficiary portal," Avery said, her voice low and urgent. "They tried to use the master override code." "But," I looked back toward the courtroom doors. "We just left. They are still in there." "Exactly," Avery said. "This wasn't a login from a computer at home. The timestamp is 30 seconds ago. It happened while they were walking out of the courtroom." "Who?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer, Avery tapped the screen to expand the details. The request came from a device registered to Sloane Graham, and then, 10 seconds later, an attempt to change the two-factor authentication phone number. My blood ran cold. The judge had just told her that if she sent so much as an email, she would be in contempt. He had stripped her of her rights, and her reaction, within 60 seconds of the gavel falling, was not to cry or to beg. It was to pull out her phone and try to hijack the system before the paperwork could be filed. "She isn't scared," I said, realizing the terrifying truth. "She doesn't care about the order." "She thinks she can beat the update speed," Avery said, typing furiously on her phone. "She thinks that if she changes the access codes before the clerk enters the judgment into the system, she can transfer the funds out and claim it was a pre-existing transaction." "Can she?" I asked. "Not if we stop her right now," Avery said, But look at this. She showed me the screen again. A new notification popped up. Failed, failed, failed. The system blocked her, Avery said. 3 wrong passwords. So we're safe. No, Avery said grimly. Look at the next line. I looked. Beneath the red, failed messages, a new, yellow notification appeared. Authentication bypass initiated via recovery key. She has the recovery key, Avery said, staring at the phone. How does she have the recovery key? That code was in your grandfather's safe deposit box, the one only you had the key to. I stared at the screen. The recovery key was a 20-digit string of random numbers. Grandpa had kept it on a laminated card in the deepest part of his safe. I had the key. The key was on my ring. I reached into my bag to touch the cold metal of the safe key, just to reassure myself. My hand brushed against my keychain. The key to the safe deposit box was gone. I looked up at Avery, my vision blurring with sudden panic. Avery, I whispered. The key? It's gone? Avery looked at me, then back at the phone. Then this isn't just a hack, she said. She didn't just decide to do this today. She stole the key weeks ago. She was planning this for the moment she lost. The elevator doors opened with a cheerful ding, but neither of us moved. She is trying to drain the liquid accounts, Avery said, her thumbs flying across her screen as she dialed the trustee's emergency line. Right now, in the hallway of the courthouse. We have to stop her, I said. We don't just have to stop her, Avery said, holding the phone to her ear. We have to catch her doing it. She looked at me. Eleanor, turn around. We aren't leaving. I turned back toward the courtroom hallway. The victory I had felt 10 seconds ago was gone, replaced by the sickening realization that the man in the black suit had been right. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a war, and my sister had just launched a nuclear strike from her iPhone. Avery Holt did not look like a lawyer in that moment. She looked like a bomb disposal technician watching a timer count down. We were standing in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor of the courthouse, people walking past us with coffees and briefcases, completely unaware that a digital heist was taking place in the invisible network surrounding us. Avery held her phone flat in her palm, her thumb hovering over the screen. The device pinged again. It was a sharp, biting sound that cut through the low murmur of the hallway. She is fast, Avery said, her voice tight. She is not even trying to hide it. Look. I looked at the screen. The interface of the security app was simple. Dark mode with bright red text that made my stomach turn. Alert login attempt failed. Incorrect. MFA token. Timestamp 2:21 p.m. She tried the password, Avery explained, her eyes scanning the data stream. She guessed it, or she found it in your grandfather's papers, but she hit the multi-factor authentication wall. She doesn't have your phone, so she can't get the 6-digit code. So she's stopped, I asked, hope rising in my chest. No, Avery said. She is pivoting. Watch. A new notification slid onto the screen. Pushing the previous one down, this one was yellow, indicating a system modification request. Alert account recovery initiated. Request update, trusted phone number. Method recovery key, bypass. There it is, Avery said, and for the first time, I saw genuine anger in her eyes. The classic account takeover. She knows she can't get the code sent to your phone, so she is trying to tell the bank that you lost your phone. She is entering the recovery key, the one she stole from the safe, to prove she is you. Then she is going to change the trusted number to her own burner phone. Once she does that, the bank sends the code to her, not you. And then she is in. I felt sick. Can she do that? If we were a normal bank, maybe, Avery said, but we are not with a normal bank. We are with Marston. Avery tapped the call support button within the app. She did not put it on speaker, but she held the phone close enough for me to hear. There was no hold music. There was no robotic voice telling us our call was important. It rang once, and then a human voice answered. Marston Security Operations, Agent 419, identify. The voice was male, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. It sounded exactly like the man in the black suit who had just left the courtroom. "This is Avery Holt, legal counsel for the Eleanor Graham beneficiary interest. Authorization code, Delta X-ray 77. We have an active intrusion attempt on the Arthur Brooks Trust portal. Timestamp 2:21 p.m. "Verifying," the agent said. There was the sound of rapid typing on a mechanical keyboard. "Confirmed. We see the activity. Access attempt via web portal. IP address traces to a cellular data connection. Device fingerprint is an Apple iPhone 15 Pro, registered on the ATT network." Avery looked at me. "Sloane's phone. We have a secondary attempt to modify the root contact information," the agent continued. "The user is inputting a 20-character alphanumeric recovery key. The key is valid." "The key is stolen," Avery said sharply. "The user is a hostile party who has just been sanctioned by the probate court. I need an immediate hard freeze on all accounts. Level 4 lockdown. No transfers, no contact changes, no liquidity events." "Understood," the agent said. The typing speed increased. "Initiating level 4 freeze. We are killing the active session now." On Avery's phone screen, the status bar at the top turned from yellow to a solid, reassuring gray. "Status locked. Administrator override." "Session terminated," the agent reported. "The user has been booted from the portal. The recovery key they used has been burned and invalidated. We have flagged the device fingerprint as fraudulent. If that device attempts to access any Marston server again, we will auto-block the IP range." "Good," Avery said. "I also need a full incident report generated immediately. I need the geolocation of the device at the time of the attempt, the exact keystrokes, and the failed authentication logs. Send it to my secure email in PDF format." "Generating now," the agent said. "Anything else, Ms. Holt?" "Yes," Avery said. "Flag the account for litigation hold. No one speaks to the family. If Thomas, Marjorie, or Sloane Graham call the service line, they are to be directed immediately to my office. Do not confirm balances. Do not confirm existence of accounts. Do not even tell them the time of day." "Noted. The account is now a black box. The report is in your inbox. Good day." The line went dead. Avery lowered the phone and let out a long breath. She looked at me, her face pale but composed. "We got her," Avery said. "She was seconds away. If she had changed that phone number, she could have initiated a wire transfer before we even left the building. Electronic funds transfers can clear in minutes if the amount is under a certain threshold." I leaned against the wall, my legs shaking. She was doing it right in front of us. I closed my eyes, and the image flashed back into my mind. The courtroom, the judge reading the letter, my father collapsing onto the bench, and Sloane. I remembered looking at her. She had been looking down at her lap, her face obscured by her hair. Her hands had been hidden under the table. I had thought she was crying. I had thought she was hiding her face in shame, humiliated by the public undressing of her character. I had felt a momentary pang of pity for her. I was such a fool. She hadn't been crying. She had been typing. She had been entering the recovery key. While the judge was lecturing her about the no contest clause, while he was threatening her with jail time, she was under the table, frantically trying to rob the estate before the gavel hit the wood. She wasn't listening to the judge. She was calculating her latency speed. "She is a sociopath," I whispered. "She is desperate," Avery corrected. "And desperate people make mistakes. This is the mistake we needed." Avery's phone chimed. The email from Marston had arrived. "Okay," Avery said, tapping the file. "Here it is, the incident report. Look at the geolocation." She zoomed in on the map. The pin was dropped exactly on 500 Pearl Street, the courthouse. "She didn't even wait to get to the car," Avery said. "She tried to hack the account from inside the building. This is perfect." "Why is it perfect?" I asked. "It's terrifying." "Because," Avery said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. "The judge just issued a protective order. He told her not to touch the assets. He told her not to contact the financial institutions, and 3 minutes after he said that, she tried to override the security protocol. Avery opened her email app and began typing a new message. "I am sending this directly to the court clerk," Avery said as she typed. "I am copying Mitchell Dane. I am attaching the time-stamped log from Marston. I am attaching the geolocation data, and I am adding a simple subject line, immediate violation of court order, urgent." She hit send. The swoosh sound of the email departing felt like a guillotine blade dropping. "Mitchell Dane is going to have a heart attack," Avery said. "He just told the judge they would comply, now, before he can even get his client a coffee. She has committed wire fraud and contempt of court. The judge will see this before he leaves his chambers for lunch." "What will happen?" I asked. "The judge won't just sanction her," Avery said. "He will issue a bench warrant. If she tries this again, she won't be sleeping in her quiet luxury house. She will be sleeping in county booking." We walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding afternoon sun. The city looked the same, taxis honking, tourists taking photos, pigeons fighting over crumbs, but the world felt different to me. It felt sharper. I realized that the war wasn't over just because the hearing was done. The enemy had just moved from the battlefield to the shadows. That evening, the silence in my apartment felt heavy. I had double-locked the door. I had checked the windows. I had unplugged the landline. I felt like I was under siege. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. My laptop was open in front of me. Avery had told me to expect a call at 8 o'clock. At exactly 8 o'clock, the screen lit up. It was a secure video conferencing link. No branding, no logo, just a black screen that requested a passkey. I typed in the code Avery had given me. The screen flickered, and then an image appeared. It was the man in the black suit. He was sitting in an office that looked as sterile as he was. The walls were white. There were no pictures, no plants, just a glass desk and a high-backed ergonomic chair. He was still wearing the same suit he had worn in court. He looked as if he hadn't moved, hadn't eaten, hadn't blinked since the afternoon. "Ms. Graham," he said. His voice was crystal clear through the speakers, stripping away the distance between us. "Mr. I hesitated. I still didn't know his name. "You may call me Silas," he said. It was the first time he had offered anything personal, though I suspected Silas was just a code name, a designation for his role. "Thank you for stopping her today," I said. "Avery told me what happened." "It was expected," Silas said. He did not accept the gratitude. He merely acknowledged the fact. "We have been monitoring the device ID for weeks. We knew she had the key. We were simply waiting for her to use it so we could burn it." "Burn it?" "Invalidate it," Silas explained. "And flag the user. She can never access a Marston system again. If she tries to open a checking account with us in 10 years, the system will auto-reject her." He leaned forward slightly, clasping his hands on the desk. "However," Silas said, "we did not schedule this call to discuss your sister's incompetence. That is a matter for the police now." "Then why are we talking?" I asked. "Because the hearing today was only the first phase," Silas said. "We established the validity of the trust. We triggered the no contest clause. But there is a component of your grandfather's estate planning that we could not discuss in open court. It is sensitive, and it is dangerous." My stomach tightened. "Dangerous." "Your grandfather was a man who believed in contingencies," Silas said. "He knew that if his family was cut off, they would not just go away. He knew they had liabilities. He knew about the debts." I frowned. "What debts? My parents are comfortable. Sloane is well. She acts rich." Silas didn't smile, but his eyes seemed to darken. "Acting rich is expensive. Ms. Graham, we have run a full forensic background check on all potential beneficiaries as part of our due diligence. It is standard procedure when a no contest clause is involved. We need to know who has the most motivation to break the rules." He tapped a key on his keyboard, and a document appeared on my screen. It was a financial summary. "Your father is leveraged to the hilt," Silas said. his voice flat. He has 3 mortgages on his house. He has leveraged his pension. He is involved in a commercial real estate deal that is currently underwater by about $4 million. He was counting on your grandfather's estate to cover the margin call next month. I stared at the numbers. They were staggering. My father, the man who lectured me about fiscal responsibility, was drowning. And Sloan? I asked, dreading the answer. Sloan is worse, Silas said. Sloan has been borrowing against her inheritance for 2 years. That's impossible, I said. You can't borrow against money you don't have. You can if you have predatory lenders, Silas said. There are private equity firms that specialize in heir advances, high interest, high risk. Sloan borrowed nearly $600,000 to fund her lifestyle and her brand. She signed contracts promising to pay it back with interest the moment Arthur Brooks died. She showed them the old will, the one before the trust. I put my hand over my mouth. Oh my God. The lenders are not banks, Silas said. They are not nice people. Now that the court has declared she gets nothing, those contracts are in default. Sloan isn't just broke. Ms. Graham, she is in debt to people who do not file lawsuits. They send collectors. He paused, letting the reality sink in. This explains the desperation in the hallway. Silas continued. She wasn't trying to steal the money to buy a new car. She was trying to steal it to save her life. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If she's in trouble, that's her problem. I can't help her. The judge said, I am telling you this, Silas interrupted, because your grandfather knew. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing through the screen. Mr. Brooks knew about the loans. He knew about the margin calls. He knew that cutting them off would back them into a corner, and he didn't want you to be the target of their desperation. Silas reached for a file on his desk. That is why there is an addendum to the trust, Silas said, a Part B, that was not filed with the court today because it is not public record. It is a private instruction. What does it say? I asked. It says, Silas said slowly, that there is a way for them to get help. But it is not a handout. It is a test, and you are the one who has to administer it. He opened the file. Your grandfather left a specific sum of money separate from the main trust in a contingency fund. It is enough to clear your father's debt and pay off Sloan's lenders. It would wipe the slate clean. He wanted to bail them out, I asked, feeling a surge of anger. After everything they did. No, Silas said. He didn't want to bail them out. He wanted to offer them a choice. The addendum states that the funds can be released to them, but only if they agree to one condition, a condition that requires them to destroy the one thing they value more than money. What is the condition? I asked. Silas looked at the document, then back at me. We haven't discussed the contents of the safe deposit box, Silas said. The physical one, the one the key belongs to. The papers inside that box are the price of their freedom, and tomorrow, you and I are going to the bank to open it. What is in the box? I whispered. The truth. Silas said. The kind of truth that doesn't just end a lawsuit, it ends a reputation. The screen went black. The call ended. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I looked at the dark screen of my laptop. I thought I had won. I thought the judge had banged the gavel and the story was over. But Silas was right. The story wasn't over. We had just finished the prologue. The real revenge wasn't denying them the money. It was forcing them to choose between their greed and their secrets. And tomorrow, I would hold the key. The screen of my laptop had gone black after Silas ended the call, but I remained sitting at my kitchen table for a long time. The silence in my apartment was different now. Before, it had been the silence of anxiety, the waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, it was the silence of understanding. For the last 6 months, my family had asked the same question, sometimes to my face, sometimes in whispered conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Why Eleanor? Why did Arthur Brooks, a man who built a logistics empire from a single truck, leave the keys to his kingdom to the granddaughter who drove a 5-year-old sedan and bought her blazers on sale. They thought I was the emotional choice. They thought I was the nurse, the soft-hearted caregiver who had spoon-fed an old man's soup and won his favor through pity. They believed I was selected because I was kind. They were wrong. I wasn't selected. I was deployed. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. It wasn't a memory of a courtroom or a lawyer's office. It was a memory of a rainy Tuesday. 18 months ago, Grandpa had fallen in the hallway. It was a bad fall, the kind that usually marks the beginning of the end for men of 88. When the hospital called, my mother was at a charity gala and couldn't leave until the silent auction was over. My father was on a golf trip in Scotland and didn't check his voicemail for 12 hours. Sloane was in Milan for Fashion Week. I was the only one who answered. I was the one who drove to the hospital, signed the admission forms, and sat in the plastic chair next to his bed for 3 days while he drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally woke up and saw me there, just me, he didn't cry. He didn't thank me for being a dutiful granddaughter. He looked at the empty chairs where his children should have been, and his eyes hardened. "Pack your bags, Elle," he had whispered, his voice rough from the ventilator. "You're moving in. We have work to do." I moved into the guest room of his sprawling house on Maple Drive not to hoard his money. But because he was terrified, he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being managed. For years, the family narrative had been set in stone. Sloane was the brilliant one. Sloane had an MBA. Sloane had the vision. She was the one who sat in on meetings with his financial advisors, nodding intelligently and using buzzwords like diversification and liquidity events. My parents beamed at her, convinced she was the heir apparent to the Brooks legacy. I was just Eleanor. I worked in back office. That's what they called it at family dinners, dismissing my career with a wave of a hand. But Grandpa knew the truth. He knew exactly what I did at the Larkwell Compliance Group. Larkwell is a private firm that specializes in corporate risk and regulatory auditing. My job wasn't sexy. I didn't make deals. I didn't launch brands. My job was to look at a stack of boring, perfect-looking documents and find the one line that didn't add up. I spent my days hunting for inconsistencies, the timestamp that was 2 minutes off, the signature that was slightly too shaky, the expense report that rounded up too many times. I was a professional skeptic. Grandpa didn't need a nurse. He needed a compliance officer. One night, about 3 months before he died, we were sitting in his study, the fire was dying down, and he was reviewing a stack of papers Sloane had sent over for him to sign. They were routine authorizations, she had said. He handed one to me. "Tell me what you see." Elle, I looked at the document. It was a request to transfer power of attorney for a specific investment account to facilitate rapid trading. It looked standard. The legal jargon was correct. "The date," I said after 10 seconds. "What about it?" "She dated it for the 1st of the month," I said. "But the notary stamp is from the 3rd, and the witness signature is her assistant, who I know was on vacation that week." Grandpa nodded, taking the paper back and feeding it into the shredder. The sound of the paper tearing was the only noise in the room. "People think thieves break in with crowbars," Grandpa had said, watching the paper turn into confetti. "They don't. People don't rob with hands. Elle, they rob with stories. They tell you a story about why they need a signature, why they need a transfer, why they are the only ones who can save you. And if you believe the story, you hand them the keys yourself." He looked at me then, his eyes clear and sharp. "Sloane tells beautiful stories, but you read the footnotes. That was why he chose me. He didn't need me to grow the money. He needed me to protect the truth. And now, sitting in my kitchen, thinking about the addendum that Silas had mentioned, I realized just how far ahead Grandpa had been looking. Silas had called it a contingency fund, but the legal mechanism he described was something much more specific. It was an anti-pledge clause, weaponized. In the world of trusts, it is common to have a spendthrift provision, which prevents creditors from seizing a beneficiary's interest, but what Silas had described was different. Grandpa had inserted a clause that stated if any beneficiary attempts to assign, pledge, or encumber their potential inheritance as collateral for a loan prior to the distribution of assets. Their interest in the trust shall be immediately terminated. It meant you couldn't borrow against the will. You couldn't walk into a lender's office and say, "Lend me $1 million now, and I'll pay you back when the old man dies." If you did that, you didn't just owe the money, you lost the inheritance you were betting on. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as a specific memory clicked into place. It was Easter brunch. 6 months ago, we were at that overpriced country club my parents loved. Sloane was wearing a pastel dress that probably cost more than my car. She was glowing, high on champagne and confidence. She had just announced the launch of her new lifestyle brand. "SG Aesthetics," my father had asked, delicately, about the financing. "That is a lot of overhead. Sweetie, inventory, warehousing, are you sure you have the liquidity?" Sloane had laughed, a tinkling, carefree sound. She took a sip of her mimosa and winked at him. "Don't worry, Daddy," she had said, her voice loud enough for the table to hear. "I secured a bridge loan. The terms are fantastic. It is basically done. The collateral is just waiting to be transferred. It's practically money in the bank." I had looked up from my plate. "What collateral?" I asked. Sloane had rolled her eyes. "Assets, Eleanor, future assets. It is called leverage. You wouldn't understand. You're too busy counting pennies." My parents had laughed. They thought she was a genius. They thought she was playing the game of high finance. But Grandpa hadn't laughed. He had been sitting at the head of the table, cutting his ham with surgical precision. He hadn't said a word. He just listened. And the next day, he called Marston fiduciary. He knew exactly what future assets meant. She had leveraged his death. She had walked into a lender's office, likely a hard money lender, the kind Silas warned about, and signed a contract promising them a piece of the Arthur Brooks estate the moment his heart stopped beating. I reached for my phone and dialed Avery. "He told you about the addendum," Avery said the moment she picked up. She didn't say hello. She knew why I was calling. "Did you know?" I asked. "I suspected," Avery said. "I ran a UCC search on Sloane this afternoon, right after the hearing. A UCC filing is a public notice that a creditor has an interest in a debtor's personal property, and I found 3 of them," Avery said. Her voice was grim. "But they aren't filed against a car or a business inventory. They are filed against all beneficial interest in the estate of Arthur Brooks. Sloane signed these documents 8 months ago." "8 months," I whispered. "She sold her share before he was even sick." "It gets worse, Eleanor," Avery said. "I looked at the amounts. The principal is $600,000, just like Silas said, but the interest rate, it is 25%, compounding monthly, and there is a default clause." "What happens in default?" "If the borrower fails to secure the inheritance within 12 months, or if the inheritance is denied," Avery explained, translating the legalese into a horror story. "The lender has the right to pursue all other assets of the borrower, and any guarantors." I stopped breathing for a second. "Guarantors?" "Sloane doesn't own a house," Avery said. "She leases her condo. She leases her car. She has no tangible assets to secure a loan of that size. A lender wouldn't give her $600,000 on a promise alone. They would need a co-signer with real property." "My parents," I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "I pulled the deed on your parents' house on Maple Drive," Avery said, her voice soft, as if she were breaking the news of a death. "There is a new lien recorded 7 months ago. It is a second position deed of trust. The signatory is Thomas Graham." I closed my eyes. The picture was complete. It wasn't just Sloane, it was all of them. They had all bet on Grandpa dying. My father had leveraged his home, the home Grandpa had helped him buy 20 years ago, to fund Sloane's vanity project, convinced that the inheritance would wipe the debt clean in a few months. They had turned Grandpa's life into a ticking clock. That was why they were so desperate in court. That was why my father looked like he was going to vomit when the judge mentioned the no contest clause. That was why Sloane tried to hack the account in the hallway. They weren't just fighting for extra cash. They were fighting to keep the roof over their heads. By triggering the no contest clause, Sloane hadn't just lost her own money, she had triggered the default on the loans. They are going to lose everything, I said. The house, the cars, the pension? Yes, Avery said. Unless what? Unless you use the contingency fund, Avery said. Silas mentioned it to me, too. The rescue protocol. Grandpa left enough money in a separate pot to pay off these specific debts. He knew they would do this. He calculated the exact amount. So he wants me to save them, I asked, feeling a surge of bitterness. After they tried to frame me, after they called me a thief. No, Avery said. He doesn't want you to save them. He wants you to give them a choice. He left the money, but he put the key in your hand, and he put a condition on it that he knew would break them. The safe deposit box, I said. Silas calls it the box of truth, Avery said. I don't know what is in there, Eleanor, but whatever it is, Grandpa believed that making them face it was more important than the money. He isn't asking you to write a check. He's asking you to hold up a mirror. I looked out the window at the city lights. I thought about my father, sitting in his study right now, probably drinking scotch and looking at the walls of the house he was about to lose. I thought about Sloane, frantically texting her lenders, trying to spin a new story. They had spent their lives building a facade of success, of quiet luxury, of the perfect family. Grandpa had seen right through it. He had seen the rot in the foundation. I'm going to the bank tomorrow, I told Avery. I'll be there, she said. And Eleanor, be careful. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered narcissist is lethal. I hung up the phone. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the little sister who stayed in the guest room. I was the compliance officer. And tomorrow, I was going to conduct the final audit. I was going to open the box, and I was going to see exactly what my family was worth. The morning after the hearing, the city felt different. The air was sharper, the noise of the traffic more aggressive. I did not go to the bank immediately. Silas had sent a secure message at 6 a.m. instructing me to come to the Marston fiduciary headquarters. First, the building was a fortress of glass and steel in the financial district. The kind of place that looked like it had no entrance, only exits. When I arrived, the security guards did not ask for my ID. They already knew my face. They escorted me to the 45th floor, to a conference room that overlooked the entire city. Silas was waiting. He was standing by the window, looking down at the streets below. He turned when I entered. Coffee, he offered. It was the most human thing he had said to me so far. No, I said. I want to know what is in the box. The box is the final step, Silas said, walking over to the table. But before we open it, you need to understand the machine you are up against. You think you are fighting your sister and your parents? You are not. You are fighting a business model. He pressed a button on the table, and a holographic screen embedded in the surface lit up. My title, Silas said, is not courier. I am the Chief Compliance Officer for the Risk Management Division. My job is not to distribute money. My job is to prevent disaster, and for the last 6 months, your grandfather and I were building a firewall. He swiped his hand across the table, and a timeline appeared. It was populated with hundreds of entries. This is the contact log, Silas explained. Arthur Brooks was disciplined. Every time your family called him, every time they visited, every time they sent a text message demanding money, he logged it. He called our secure line and dictated a report. I looked at the entries. August 12th, Thomas called, asked for $50,000, threatened to stop visiting if I didn't pay. September 4th, Sloane visited, tried to access my laptop while I was in the bathroom. September 20th, Marjorie called, crying, said they would put me in a home if I didn't sign the power of attorney. He recorded everything, I whispered. He knew they were coming for him. He knew, Silas said. But here is the part you do not know. Your family is not smart enough to orchestrate a legal blitzkrieg like the one we saw yesterday. Sloane is impulsive. Your father is desperate. They needed a strategist, Silas tapped a new name on the screen. Consultant Julian Vane, Asset Recovery Specialist. Who is that? I asked. He is a fixer, Silas said. He is the man you hire when you want to break a trust. We found his contract in your father's email records during our forensic sweep. They hired him 4 months ago. His promise was simple. I can force the trustee to settle. Silas pulled up a series of emails between my father and this Julian Vane. Vane to Thomas Graham. The key is speed. We need to file for probate before the trust is recorded. If we can get a judge to grant an emergency order, we can freeze the assets before Marston takes control. We need to claim incapacity. It does not have to be true. It just has to be loud. They planned it, Avery said from the doorway. She had walked in quietly, her face grim. They didn't just react to his death. They had a playbook. Avery sat down next to me. She looked tired. I spent the night digging into Vane. He is a ghost. He operates out of a shell company in Delaware, but his strategy is always the same. Accuse the caregiver of abuse, isolate the victim, file ex parte motions to bypass due process. It is a formula. And it almost worked, I said. It would have worked, Silas said, if your grandfather hadn't been 2 steps ahead. Silas opened a new file. We have something else, something Vane didn't account for. What? The past, Silas said. He looked at Avery. Ms. Holt, tell her who called you this morning. Avery smiled, but it was a sad smile. Do you remember Mr. Henderson? Your grandfather's old lawyer, the one who retired 5 years ago. Of course, I said. He drafted Grandpa's first will, the one from 20 years ago. He called me at 7 o'clock this morning, Avery said. He heard about the hearing. He heard about the allegations of undue influence. He is 80 years old, I said. What can he do? He can testify, Avery said. He told me that 6 months ago. Grandpa visited him, not for legal advice, but for a confession. Grandpa wanted to make sure there was a record that predated Marston. He wanted a record from a man who had known him for 30 years. Avery reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. Mr. Henderson recorded a video affidavit. He kept it in his personal safe, sealed, with instructions to release it only if the family challenged the Marston Trust. Play it, I said. Silas nodded and plugged the drive into the table's port. The screen flickered, and then my grandfather's face filled the room. He looked younger in the video. He was wearing his favorite cardigan, the blue one I had bought him for Christmas. He was sitting in Mr. Henderson's office, a cup of tea in his hand. He looked calm, lucid, sharp. My name is Arthur Brooks, he said to the camera. Today is June 15th. I am making this statement of my own free will. He took a sip of tea. I am creating a new trust, Grandpa said. I am moving my assets to a professional fiduciary. I am doing this because I love my granddaughter, Eleanor, and because I know my son, Thomas, and my granddaughter, Sloane, will try to destroy her. I felt tears prick my eyes. Hearing his voice again was like a physical ache. They will say I am crazy, Grandpa continued, looking directly into the lens. They will say, Eleanor manipulated me. They will say she isolated me. They are lying. Eleanor is the only reason I'm still alive. She is the only one who checks my blood pressure. She is the only one who asks me about my day, not my portfolio. He leaned forward. I want to be very clear, Grandpa said, his voice hardening. If Thomas or Sloane use the court system to try to strip Eleanor of her rights, I consider that an act of violence against my wishes. I consider it a betrayal, and I have instructed my trustees to treat it as such. If they fight this, let them lose everything. Maybe then they will learn to earn something for themselves. The video ended. The screen went black. That, Avery said softly, is the nail in the coffin that destroys the narrative of the evil caregiver. It proves that his intent was consistent for months. It proves he loved me, I said, my voice shaking. It proves he protected you, Silas corrected. But the enemy does not care about love. They care about survival. And right now, they are drowning. Silas turned off the screen and looked at me. We have intelligence that your parents are preparing a new filing. Vane is advising them to pivot. They can't win on incapacity anymore. The medical records in this video are too strong. So they are going to change the story. Change it to what? I asked. Forgery, Silas said. I stared at him. What? They are going to file a motion claiming that the signature on the trust document is a forgery, Silas said calmly. They are going to claim that you and a rogue employee at Marston conspired to swap the pages. They are going to claim that the Arthur Brooks who signed that paper was an imposter or that the digital signature was hacked. That is insane, I said. It was notarized. It was videotaped. It is a delay tactic, Avery said. If they allege criminal fraud, it pauses the probate sanctions. It buys them time. Time to hide assets. Time to negotiate with their lenders. Time to smear your name in the press. They are desperate, Silas repeated. Vane is telling them to burn the house down if they can't have the money. They want to make sure you go to prison. They would send me to prison, I asked, feeling a cold knot of nausea. My own parents. To save themselves from bankruptcy, Silas asked. Yes, they would. He checked his watch. The hearing on sanctions is in 2 days. We expect them to file the forgery motion tomorrow morning. We need to be ready. How do we get ready? I asked. We open the box, Silas said. The safe deposit box. The physical evidence inside is the only thing that can stop Vane's strategy. It contains the proof that the debt is real, and the proof that they have been lying about signatures for a long time. I left the Marston building at noon. Avery went back to her office to prepare the defense against the incoming forgery motion. Silas stayed behind to coordinate with the security team. I went home. I needed to think. I needed to prepare myself for what I was going to find in that box. My apartment was quiet. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I made myself a sandwich that I didn't eat. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, replaying the video of Grandpa in my mind. They will try to destroy her. He had known. He had looked into the future and seen this war. At 4 o'clock, the mail arrived. I heard the clatter of the mail slot in the lobby, and then the sound of the postman walking up the stairs. A few minutes later, an envelope slid under my door. It wasn't unusual. My building manager often slid notices under the door. I walked over and picked it up. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, no stamp. It hadn't come through the post office. Someone had hand-delivered it. My name was written on the front in block letters. Eleanor. I hesitated. My first instinct was to call Silas. My second was to call the police. But curiosity is a powerful force. I tore open the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It looked like a photocopy. It was a high-quality copy, the kind made on a professional machine. I unfolded it. It was a promissory note, a loan agreement. The header was from a company called Apex Capital Partners. I recognized the name from the list Silas had shown me. They were one of the predatory lenders Sloan had used. The amount was $300,000. The date was 8 months ago, but it wasn't Sloan's signature at the bottom. It was Grandpa's signature. Arthur Brooks. I stared at it. The signature looked like his. The loop of the A, the sharp cross of the T. It was his handwriting. But something was wrong. I walked over to my desk and pulled out an old birthday card Grandpa had given me last year. I held the photocopy next to the card. I looked closely. The signature on the loan document was shaky, not the shakiness of an old man, but the shakiness of a hand moving too slowly. The lines were jagged, as if someone had been tracing them, and there was a hesitation mark at the end of the B, a tiny pool of ink where the pen had rested too long. Grandpa never hesitated when he signed his name. He signed with a flourish. I looked at the witness line on the loan document. Witness Thomas Graham. My father had witnessed it. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a loan Sloan had taken out against her future inheritance. This was a loan my father had taken out in Grandpa's name. They hadn't just waited for him to die. They had impersonated him while he was alive. They had forged his signature to get cash. And now, they were going to accuse me of forgery. I realized why this envelope was here. It wasn't a threat from Sloan. It wasn't a warning from my parents. It was a leak. Someone had sent this to me. Someone who had access to the loan documents. I looked at the bottom of the page. There was a tiny, faint timestamp from a fax machine, sent from Vane Consulting Group. Julian Vane, the fixer. Why would the fixer send me the evidence that incriminated his own clients? Unless he knew they were going to lose, unless he knew the ship was sinking, and he wanted to make sure he wasn't on board when it went down, or maybe, just maybe, he was playing a double game. My phone rang. It was Avery. "Eleanor," she said, her voice urgent. "I just got a call from the court clerk. Your parents just filed the motion." "The forgery motion?" I asked, staring at the paper in my hand. "Yes," Avery said. "But it is worse than we thought. They aren't just claiming you forged the trust. They are claiming you forged a series of checks last year. They are submitting expert analysis from Vane's team." "Avery," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I have something." "What do you have?" "I have a loan document," I said, "for $300,000, signed by Arthur Brooks, witnessed by Thomas Graham." "So," Avery asked, "Grandpa signed loans sometimes?" "No," I said. "He didn't sign this one. I am looking at the signature. It is a tracing. It is a bad tracing." There was silence on the line. "If that is true," Avery said slowly, "then your father just committed bank fraud. Federal bank fraud. And I think Vane sent it to me," I said. "Bring it," Avery commanded. "Bring it to the bank tomorrow. We are going to compare it with the originals in the safe deposit box. If this matches what I think is in there, your father isn't going to lose his house. He is going to lose his freedom." I hung up. I looked at the forged signature again. Arthur Brooks. They had stolen his name. They had stolen his credit. And now, they were trying to steal his justice. I folded the paper and put it in my bag. I wasn't afraid of the sanctions hearing anymore. I wasn't afraid of the accusations. I was the compliance officer, and I had just found the discrepancy that was going to bring the whole company down. The morning sun that filtered into Avery Holt's conference room was bright, but the document sitting on the mahogany table made the room feel cold. Avery was not looking at the paper with her naked eye. She was using a digital loupe, a small device that magnified the ink on the page onto a high-resolution tablet screen. We had been staring at the anonymous loan document for 20 minutes. "It is a tracing," Avery said finally. Her voice was devoid of doubt. "Look at the pixelation on the curvature of the B in Brooks. See those hesitation marks? Your grandfather signed his name with a fluid. Muscle memory speed. This signature was drawn. Someone placed a translucent sheet over a genuine signature and moved a pen slowly along the lines. It is clumsy. It is desperate." She looked up at me. "And look at the witness signature." I looked. "Thomas Graham." "Your father witnessed a forgery," Avery said. "He attested to the validity of a signature that he knew was fake, and this document is dated 8 months ago. This is the smoking gun. Eleanor, this connects the lawsuit he was served with in the hallway to the fraud they are trying to pin on you." "They filed a motion accusing me of forgery," I said, the irony tasting bitter in my mouth. "Projective identification," Avery said, packing the document into her briefcase. "They accuse you of exactly what they are guilty of. It is a psychological defense mechanism, but legally, it is a disaster. They just invited the court to examine handwriting. They opened the door, and we are going to walk right through it." We left for the courthouse. The mood was different this time. There was no swagger from Mitchell Dane. There was no quiet luxury from Sloan. When we entered Department 34, the air was thick with the scent of impending doom. My parents were already seated. My father looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His skin was pasty, and he kept rubbing his left arm. A nervous tic I had never seen before. Sloane sat apart from them. She was staring at her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen, her face a mask of panic. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom. He did not look at the docket. He looked at the people. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and placed his hands flat on the bench. "This is the time set for the hearing on sanctions and the status of the trust contest," Judge Harrison said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. "However, before we proceed with the arguments, the court has received a supplemental report from the trustee regarding the security of the estate assets." Mitchell Dane stood up. He looked exhausted. "Your Honor, regarding the previous motions." "Sit down. Mr. Dane," the judge said. It wasn't a shout. It was a dismissal. "I am not finished." The judge turned to the clerk. "Enter the report from Marston Fiduciary into the record." Silas, the man in the black suit, stood up from the table behind me. He walked to the center of the room. He did not look at Sloane. He simply handed a flash drive and a thick stack of stapled paper to the bailiff. "Your Honor," Silas said, his voice filling the room with its terrifying calmness. "The trustee submits a security incident report dated 2 days ago. Timestamp 2:21 in the afternoon. Location 500 Pearl Street. This courthouse." Sloane stopped typing on her phone. She froze. "The report details an unauthorized attempt to access the beneficiary portal of the Arthur Brooks Trust," Silas continued. "The attempt utilized a stolen recovery key. It occurred approximately 4 minutes after this court issued a protective order barring the petitioner from contacting the financial custodians." The judge looked at Sloane. "Ms. Graham, were you or were you not instructed by this court to refrain from accessing the assets?" Sloane did not stand up. She looked at Mitchell. Mitchell looked at the table. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, his voice straining to find a respectful tone. "My client was confused about the scope of the order. She believed she was permitted to check the status of the accounts, not to withdraw funds. The logs show an attempt to change the two-factor authentication phone number," Silas said. "That is not checking status. That is an account takeover. It is a hostile action synonymous with theft." Judge Harrison's face remained impassive, but his eyes were hard. "This is a court of law, not a theater for family drama. When I give an order, it is not a suggestion, it is a mandate. Ms. Graham, your actions in the hallway of this courthouse demonstrate a flagrant disregard for judicial authority. You have proven that you cannot be trusted with access." "Your Honor, if I may," Mitchell interrupted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "In light of recent developments and the high emotions involved, the petitioner moves to withdraw all pending motions. We withdraw the contest. We withdraw the accusations of undue influence. We ask that the court dismiss the matter without prejudice so the family can heal privately." I watched my sister. She wasn't healing. She was trembling. Judge Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. "Withdraw, Mr. Dane. You do not get to throw a grenade into a room and then ask for it back after the pin is pulled. You filed a petition accusing this woman," he gestured to me, "of elder abuse. You dragged her reputation through the mud. You forced the trustee to incur significant legal fees to defend the estate. And now that you realized you walked into a trap of your own making, you want to leave." "We are simply trying to de-escalate," Mitchell said weakly. "This is a bad faith filing," the judge declared. "You brought a case with no evidence, based on lies, and your client committed attempted wire fraud while standing in my hallway. I am denying the motion to withdraw. This case will stay open until I determine the full extent of the damages." Sloane let out a small, strangled sob. "And," the judge added, "since you raised the issue of undue influence, let us finish that conversation. The trustee has provided one final exhibit." Silas moved to the audiovisual cart. He pressed a button. The large monitors on the walls flickered to life. It was the video of Grandpa, the one I had seen in the Marston office. The room went deadly silent. On the screen, Arthur Brooks looked into the camera. His eyes were clear. His voice was steady. "I am recording this because I know my son. Grandpa said on the video. I know Thomas, and I know he will bring men to my house to try to force me to sign things. He did it last week. A notary. A stranger. They stood over my bed and told me if I didn't sign the loan papers, the bank would take the house. My father let out a gasp. He tried to stand, but my mother pulled him down, her grip on his arm vicious. I did not sign. Grandpa continued on the screen. But I know they will try again, and I know they will blame Eleanor. So let me be clear. Eleanor is the only one who stopped them. If you are watching this, it means they have sued her. It means they are trying to steal what is not theirs. The video cut to black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. That, Judge Harrison said, looking directly at my father, is the testimony of the decedent. It is admissible under the hearsay exception for statements of mind and history. Mr. Graham, your father just accused you, from the grave, of attempted coercion. My father didn't speak. He couldn't. He was staring at the blank screen, his face the color of ash. But it was Sloane who broke first. Her phone buzzed. It was a loud, jarring vibration on the wooden table. Then it buzzed again, and again, a cascade of notifications. She looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. She tapped something, read a message, and I saw the blood leave her face so fast I thought she might faint. No, she whispered. No, they can't do that. Ms. Graham, the judge asked. Sloane ignored him. She was frantic now. She looked at Mitchell. They are calling the loan. Mitchell, they are calling the loan. They saw the docket update. They know about the contest. Quiet, Sloane, Mitchell hissed. I can't be quiet, she shrieked, standing up. They just froze the operating account for my business. They are invoking the default clause. I looked at Avery. Avery nodded slightly. It was happening. The anti-pledge clause. The trust had a specific provision no beneficiary could use their potential inheritance as collateral. By filing the lawsuit, Sloane had made the trust documents public record. Her lenders, the predatory ones Silas had warned me about, had access to the court monitoring systems. They saw the no contest ruling. They saw that Sloane was going to get nothing, and when a lender realizes their collateral has evaporated, they do not wait. They attack. Your Honor, Mitchell said, trying to physically pull Sloane back into her chair. My client is under extreme duress. Your client, the judge said coldly, is experiencing the natural consequences of her actions. It appears she pledged assets she did not own, and now the bill is due. Sloane looked at me. Her eyes were wild, filled with a mixture of terror and fury. You did this, she screamed. You told them, you sent them the file. I did nothing, I said calmly. You filed the lawsuit. Sloane, you made it public. You told the world you were fighting the trust. You rang the bell yourself. Order. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Ms. Graham, sit down, or I will have you removed. Sloane collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. But it wasn't the pretty crying of a victim. It was the ugly, jagged crying of someone who has just realized she is bankrupt. The judge turned his attention to my parents. Thomas and Marjorie Graham, the judge said. My parents looked up. They looked like two children called to the principal's office, stripped of all their pretenses. The testimony I just viewed, the judge said, along with the security logs provided by the trustee, suggests a pattern of behavior that borders on criminal. You are not just bystanders here. You are participants in a coordinated effort to subvert the will of a dying man. My mother opened her mouth to speak, to offer some excuse, but the judge held up a hand. Do not speak, he warned. Anything you say can be used against you in the criminal inquiry that is likely to follow the civil suit you were served with. I am officially warning you that this court is referring the transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office for review regarding potential fraud and elder abuse. My mother put a hand to her throat. My father closed his eyes. We are done here, Judge Harrison said. I am confirming the validity of the Arthur Brooks Trust. I am ruling that Sloane Graham has violated the no contest clause and is disinherited. I am ordering the petitioner to pay all legal fees incurred by the respondent and the trustee, and I am issuing a permanent injunction preventing any of you from contacting the financial institutions." He looked at me. His expression softened. Just for a second. "Ms. Graham," he said, "the court apologizes that you had to endure this. The estate is yours to administer, as the trust dictates." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "Adjourned." The gavel banged. The room emptied fast. Mitchell Dane practically ran out the door, abandoning his clients. My parents sat frozen on the bench, unable to move. Sloane was still staring at her phone, watching her life dismantle itself one text message at a time. I stood up. I felt light, but also incredibly heavy. It was over. The legal battle was won. Silas walked over to where Avery and I were standing. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had just finished a long shift at a dangerous job. He leaned in close to Avery, his voice low so that only we could hear. "The judge did his part," Silas said. "The lenders are doing their part, but we are not finished." He looked at me. "The forgery motion is still technically on the table until they withdraw it formally," Silas said. "And they won't withdraw it until they are forced to. They still think they can bluff their way out of the fraud charges." "They can't," I said. "We have the tracing." "We have a copy," Silas corrected. "We need the original. We need the physical ink." He checked his watch. "The bank closes in 1 hour. We have the court order confirming your authority as the sole beneficiary." "So we can go in?" I asked. "Yes," Silas said. "It is time to open the box that Mr. Brooks left for you. It is time to see exactly what else your father signed." I looked back at my family one last time. They looked small, broken, but I knew better than to trust the silence of a snake. "Let's go," I said. "I want to see the truth." The vault of the First National Bank was quiet, in a way that libraries and churches only pretend to be. It was a silence engineered by 3 feet of steel and concrete, a silence designed to protect the only thing the world truly respects: value. I stood there with Silas. We were not in a courtroom anymore. There was no judge, no audience, and no theatrical lawyer adjusting his tie. There was just the hum of the ventilation system and the smell of cold metal. Silas held a clipboard. He did not look like a man who had just dismantled a family. He looked like a man checking off a grocery list. The official filing from Marston Fiduciary had been submitted to the court an hour ago. It was a document devoid of emotion, 5 pages of legal text that acted as a guillotine. It stated simply that Sloane Graham, by filing a petition to overturn the trust and by attempting to illegally access the digital assets of the estate, had triggered the no contest clause. The clause was absolute. It did not care about her debts. It did not care about her lifestyle brand. It did not care that she was the golden child. The moment she filed that lawsuit, she ceased to be a beneficiary. She became a stranger. The court had confirmed it immediately. The judge had stripped her of her standing. Every emergency motion she had filed was dismissed with prejudice. The assets she thought she was fighting for were now legally as distant from her as the moon. But the document went further. It addressed my parents. Thomas and Marjorie Graham were technically secondary beneficiaries, people who would inherit if I died or refused the trust. But the trustee had invoked a bad actor provision because they had submitted affidavits supporting a false narrative of incapacity, and because my father had witnessed a forged loan document. They were placed under indefinite administrative review. They were not just cut off, they were blacklisted. They could not call the bank. They could not request information. If they walked into a branch, the tellers would see a red flag on their screens that instructed them to call security. The sanctions order was the final blow. The judge had ordered them to pay every cent of my legal fees. They had to pay Avery, they had to pay Marston, and they had to pay the court costs. For people who were already drowning in debt, it was a financial death sentence, and my father knew it. I had seen him in the lobby of the courthouse as we left. He was sitting on a bench, holding the lawsuit he had been served. the lawsuit regarding the mobile notary incident. He wasn't shouting about family loyalty anymore. He wasn't glaring at me. He was staring at the floor, shrinking into his expensive suit, finally understanding that the forgery he had committed, the clumsy tracing of Grandpa's signature on that $300,000 loan, was not a family secret anymore. It was evidence in a federal investigation. Silas stepped forward to the wall of safe deposit boxes. He held up a small, silver key. "This is the handover," Silas said. His voice was low. "My job as the protector is finished. The threat has been neutralized. The assets are secured. The house on Maple Drive is titled in your name as of this morning. The accounts are under your sole signature." He placed the key in my hand. It was light, but it felt heavy with history. "You are the compliance officer now." "Eleanor," Silas said. He did not shake my hand. He did not smile. He simply nodded, turned around, and walked out of the vault. I heard his footsteps fade away, the rhythmic click of his heels on the marble floor marking the exit of the man who had saved my life without ever asking for a thank you. He was a creature of the contract, and the contract was fulfilled. I was alone. I looked at the number on the key, box 409. I found the box. I inserted the key. I turned it. The lock tumbled with a satisfying, mechanical thud. I pulled the long metal drawer out and carried it to the small private viewing table in the corner of the room. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no cash. There were no diamonds. Grandpa didn't believe in burying treasure. He believed in burying the truth. There were two things in the box. The first was a document in a clear plastic sleeve. I recognized it immediately. It was the original promissory note, the one my father had forged. Silas and the team had retrieved it from the lender months ago, quietly buying out the debt just to secure the evidence. I looked at the signature, seeing the original ink, the shaky traced lines of Arthur Brooks, next to the bold, arrogant signature of Thomas Graham as a witness. Made my stomach turn. This was the paper that would send my father to prison if I chose to hand it to the district attorney. It was the leverage Grandpa had left me. He hadn't just given me money. He had given me the weapon to ensure they never bothered me again. I set the forgery aside. The second item was a letter. It was in a cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's distinct, flowing script, for Eleanor, to be read when the dust settles. I broke the seal. I unfolded the paper. The scent of his pipe tobacco seemed to cling to the page, a ghost of the man I missed more than anything. I read, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means the war is over. It means they came for you, just as I feared they would, and it means you stood your ground. I know you are probably sitting in that cold vault feeling a mix of relief and guilt. You are wondering if you were too hard on them. You are wondering if you should have settled, if you should have given them a piece of the pie just to keep the peace. You are wondering if you destroyed the family. Stop it. You did not destroy the family. The greed destroyed it long before I died. I watched them for years. I watched Sloan treat people like furniture. I watched your father trade his integrity for country club memberships. I tried to help them. I paid their debts. I covered their mistakes. But I learned a hard lesson. You cannot save people who think they are entitled to be rescued. I chose you not because you were the nice one. I chose you because you were the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not an ATM. You have a good heart, but you have a sharp mind. Do not let your heart apologize for what your mind knows is right. The money is yours. The house is yours. Not as a reward, but as a tool. Use it to build a life that is real. Use it to support the things you care about. Do not use it to buy their love back. It is not for sale. And even if it were, it is counterfeit. They will hate you for winning. Let them. Their hate is just noise. The truth is in the paperwork. I am proud of you, not because you won, but because you told the truth. Love, Grandpa. I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap. The tears finally came, hot and fast, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. All the guilt I had felt, the nagging voice in my head that said a good daughter shouldn't sue her parents, a good sister shouldn't bankrupt her sibling, evaporated. Grandpa was right. I hadn't done this to them. They had done it to themselves. They had signed the papers. They had forged the names. They had filed the lawsuits. All I had done was turn on the lights. I put the letter in my purse. I left the forged note in the box. I would keep it there, safe and ready, just in case they ever forgot who held the keys. I walked out of the bank and into the bright afternoon sun. The city was moving. People were rushing to lunch. Cars were honking. Life was marching forward. I saw a woman standing across the street, near the entrance to the subway station. She was wearing a coat that looked like quiet luxury from a distance, but I could see the hem was unraveled. She was holding a phone, arguing with someone, her face twisted in that familiar mask of frustration and entitlement. It was Sloane. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the bank building, staring up at the windows of the institution that had just rejected her. She looked small. She looked ordinary. She was standing on the outside of the fence, shouting at a system that no longer cared who her grandfather was. She had spent her whole life believing that confidence was a currency. She thought if she walked tall enough, dressed well enough, and spoke loud enough, the world would bend to her. She was wrong. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. I didn't feel the need to go over there. I didn't feel the need to gloat. I didn't need to say a word. The court had spoken. The trust had spoken. The man in the black suit had spoken. I turned and walked away. Blending into the crowd, I was just Eleanor Graham. I drove a sedan. I bought my blazers on sale, but I was free. And as I walked, I realized the most important lesson of all. In the end, the world doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the person who keeps the best records. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride with Eleanor, and I really hope you enjoyed seeing justice served in such a satisfying way. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe winding down for the night? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading about where our community is from. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Kate Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to show your support. And if you really want to help this story get heard by more people, please smash that hype button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more dramas just like this one. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next video.